Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody that joined tonight. I know I had a lot of messages from people that couldn't come, and it's still COVID, so it's not in person, but more people get to join because it's not, so that's kind of cool. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that this journey followed along the border of Treaty 8 and Treaty 6 land, and so I'd just like to acknowledge the many First Nations and Métis and Inuit that traveled the lands before me on my board. And it was kind of cool that this is the whole divide of it. So I realized that after that was a really neat thing about it. And this picture here is I was just about done the whitewater section in Jasper from Athabasca Falls. And the funny part about this photo by Ken McDonald, I did not know him at all. And he happened to be sitting with his big camera at the Mile 5 bridge. And he found me later on social media and sent me this photo. So that was a kind of cool connection that I had with a random stranger. And there's a lot of synchronicities on this trip. It was a really cool journey. So I'm glad to share it with you guys tonight. And so, yeah, I named it the River of Hope Paddle. It was for mental health, and I'm glad to take you along with me. All right, so just to give you a little preface, not all of you know me, but I do live in Athabasca, Alberta. And so, like, how did I get to this point of wanting to paddleboard down the Athabasca River? It's obviously not a normal goal of like, I'm just going to paddle 663 kilometers. So last year I had really wanted to paddle to the Grand Rapids, and that was on my bucket list for a long time. Long before I paddleboarded, I wanted to paddle to the Grand Rapids. And so last year I paddled with the support of my husband with our jet boat 200 kilometers from Poacher's Landing to the Grand Rapids. And so that was my first big section of the Athabasca River that I got to experience. And so I've been paddleboarding since 2014. And last year I took my advanced flatwater instructor course with Rita Boychuk from Can River Sup. And my famous last words, which still ring true today as I left the flatwater course, were, I will never paddle that crazy whitewater stuff that you do, Rita. And so exactly 6 days later, I was on the Kananaskis River paddling whitewater and terrified. I'm a good swimmer, but I had never been in whitewater before. So this is kind of the evolution of how I ended up on the Athabasca River paddling what I did. And so obviously living along the Athabasca River, I see it every day, and it just became this natural progression. And so it began. I got to go with my husband before at the base of Athabasca Falls when he dropped me off, and we got to just really look at the power of the water. The Athabasca River, for a little bit of history and backstory, is 1,231 kilometers long-ish. I struggle with the internet and finding actual facts on the length of it. So if somebody knows that, I would appreciate that information. It originates on the Columbia ice fields off the Athabasca Glacier. 168 kilometers of this river flows through the Jasper National Park. I could have started a little bit farther up, but the most logistical starting point was at the base of Athabasca Falls. And so that's where this picture is looking at Athabasca Falls that I'm overlooking. And then on the other picture is where we descended down with our paddle boards. Another fun fact is that the Athabasca River is the largest undammed river in Alberta. So there is no dam on the Athabasca River. And it's the second largest river that flows through Alberta right now. And as it travels, it flows towards Lake Athabasca, and then it eventually joins onto the Slave River and dumps out into the Arctic Ocean. So kind of a fun fact. And earlier in the season, I was paddling with Rita, and she said to me, "You're doing something really epic. Have you considered doing it for a reason? What's your why other than seeing it?" Because it's a really great chance to bring some awareness to something that means something to you, or to a campaign that could use that awareness. And so I actually really sat with that idea for probably 5 months. I couldn't find anything that really stuck with me that I wanted to paddle for. And I didn't want it to become a cliche campaign that everybody kind of just glazed over with their eyes and wasn't interested in. And it kind of came about very organically when I found my first partner to partner with was the Center for Suicide Prevention out of Calgary. And that was a fellow AQ outdoor ambassador, Brian Hume. He works for them. And so after one of our meetings one day, I asked Brian if I could partner with him and his awareness campaign to bring, I guess, the darkness to light, per se, for mental health and for suicide prevention. And so that was the first partnership. The second partnership was with Project All In, and that's with Chad Gunther, and he's from Canmore. And he has started a mental health awareness campaign for first responders specifically. You can head over to his website of Project All In, and he has developed a couple tools for first responders, and that's police, firefighters, doctors, nurses, anybody that deals with trauma. And it's a coin, and now they also have dog tags. And all you have to do if you're a person that's struggling with mental health, and who can actually say that out loud, not very many people can say, I need help. He developed the coin to just be placed on the table or shown to a person. And if you're aware of this campaign, you know that that person is struggling. There's nothing fancy you need to do. Maybe you just need to listen, and they just need an ear. So that's Project All In with Chad. My third partnership came about within my hometown, and it was really cool that I wasn't aware of it until about May. And so Terrell Jonason started Brave Viking, and Terrell started the mental health campaign of Brave Viking clothing. And that was to bring awareness to mental health and to know that if you see somebody wearing Brave Viking clothing, that they are there to listen and be a partner with you in your struggles. If you so see somebody you don't even know with it on, you could say, hey, I see you have Brave Viking on. And it just starts that conversation. So that was my why and what I ended up partnering with to paddle down the river, I guess, carrying along with me. So this is the whitewater section. It consisted of class 2 rapids. And this was where I was joined by 4 people. Rita Boychuk joined me here. Allison and Amanda from Translucid Adventures. They took a day off of work and came and paddled with me. And we paddleboarded this section. And then later on, partway through, another friend of mine, Clark, he joined me for the last little section, and he joins me later on the river as well. You'll see some pictures of him. And so I just wanted to point out, because this is probably really new to a lot of you, if you don't paddleboard on whitewater, this is a relatively new niche. And so the paddleboard that I'm on is a 9'6" paddleboard, and it's 36 inches wide. And it's shaped, it looks like a banana. It has a big rocker to it. And the reason it has that rockered nose and a rockered tail is that you have less likelihood of catching the board in the waves as they come over the board. You'll see different gear that I have on. We're in glacial water, and so the water temperature is quite cold. So I have a dry suit on with thermal layers underneath to prevent hypothermia. Along with that, I'm wearing a helmet because your biggest danger in whitewater, along with numerous things, I guess, is hitting your head on a rock in shallow water or big rocks or wood. And as well, I have a whitewater PFD on, and I have a whitewater leash. And so if you notice, it's different than your average paddleboard leash that attaches to your ankle. These leashes have a quick release little red ball. And the system is designed so that if you ever become trapped or pinned, your paddleboard is now pulling you against a rock, or it's become a danger and a liability to you. You can just simply disconnect yourself from your board and you're safe. You're swimming in the rapids, but you're now not being held down by the paddleboard that was your buddy going down the river. Because your paddleboard is your biggest asset out there. You always want to be on your paddleboard, even when you fall off in whitewater. You want to get on as quick as possible because you can navigate the rapids and the whitewater situation that presented to you much quicker. So I thought I'd give you just a little bit of history, and you could see what I'm wearing that's very different than normal paddleboarding. So this section, I was nervous to kind of just stay healthy. Whitewater is still fairly new to me, and so I was tentative that I still had 600 kilometers ahead of me. And I just really wanted to get through this day and feel good and feel confident as I started this journey with a really swollen right knee. I actually couldn't even bend my knee to begin with. And so as I traveled on, my knee actually felt pretty good. And so this was my biggest concern the first couple of days, was just make sure, stay healthy, get through the rapids, because after this, you'll see it changes. So our day one on the river was 34 kilometers, and we made it all the way to Old Fort Point. So if you've been to Jasper before, it's kind of that nice lookout with the bridge that you can walk to. And I was just so happy. I was tired because whitewater is very tiring, but I was just super happy that that section was done. And this first day, we actually stayed in a campground by the river. And so we actually weren't already departing on the river as I do in the next day, where I actually feel like I'm heading out into the wilderness. So day two, you'll notice in these photos now that the paddleboard looks very different than what we were on previous. And so Rita and I, we loaded up our boards, and these now are 14-foot, 30-inch paddleboards. And these are called Bad Fish Selfies. And so it was like a sunshine and selfie day. We had phenomenal weather. It was just about too hot, which you don't want to say in Alberta, but it really was beautiful. And I initially, I think it was in April, maybe it was May, you have to book campgrounds in the national parks many months ahead. And so I had waited in a queue of 17,000 people to book Athabasca Island and stay on the river that night there. However, we had such good weather, and we had already made a little bit of time up on the first day, that we actually got to Athabasca Island at 10:30 in the morning. So we made an executive decision to just keep paddling. We had good weather. There was no reason to stop. And so we continued on through Jasper Lake. And if you've been to Jasper, the Athabasca River flows through that big wide lake that you see on the north side of the highway if you're driving to Jasper. And what you'll notice in that lake is that there's a lot of wood. It's really, really shallow. That's the lake that people can walk out in for literally a mile. The length of this lake is about 9 kilometers. And so when we entered this lake, what I had read from any information I could find was if you didn't find the main channel, it could be really challenging. And so I was a little bit worried about that, but being on paddle boards, we had short fins. We weren't very deep in the water, unlike a really heavy canoe. And we actually had a downwind. And I couldn't believe that we crossed Jasper Lake with a downwind and really very little carnage, because we could have had a really strong crosswind. There was so many things, a strong headwind, many things that could have gone wrong. And the river gods were on my side. We just had a great trip through the Jasper Lake. So we actually made such headway and so much distance on the river and through the lake that we nearly made it out of the park for the night. However, we actually ended up hitting such a strong headwind, we couldn't physically paddle forward anymore. And it just happened to be beside this really stunning island. And that's the picture with the log and the paddleboard and us standing on the island there. And so we got to have this great night on this island, and we really enjoyed beautiful sunsets. It was stunning will be used a lot in this, I guess. It was just a great camp spot. So we're at 80 kilometers total over 2 days right now. So day 3. So I was 45 and feeling fine. I got to wake up on my 45th birthday with that sunrise. And that was pretty amazing. Yeah, it was like it was set up to be just epic. I couldn't believe the weather we were having. And so as we headed off that morning, we had one more really big lake to cross, which is Brule Lake. And Brule Lake is another floodplain, and it can be really challenging with headwinds. And so as we made our way towards Brule Lake, the biggest question was, how long was it going to take us to get across the lake, and how much wind were we going to have to paddle? Luckily, we literally just got across that lake with no wind. It was completely glass. And I was so thankful. I couldn't believe, I felt like we stole both those lakes getting through without any wind and any struggle. And in my mind, I couldn't believe we were already on day 3 and everything was going so well. So the eagles on this trip were plenty, and they became a bit of our messengers or our spirit animal that really just led the way down the river for us. So we stopped early in the day to have lunch, and this is kind of a funny story within the trip. So we stopped by Old Entrance, and we were beside the train bridge, and I'm making salami sandwiches for Rita and I go, because I don't want to cut on my paddleboard. The easiest solution in my brain at the time was to cut the salami like a cucumber with my sharp knife towards my thumb. And that led me to nearly slice the whole side of my thumb off. So we did a little first aid on the side of the river, and I paddled with a giant gauze thumb for really the rest of the trip. It was pretty funny. I was like, this is how it ends. This is how I don't finish this trip, is slicing my thumb off. So it's just one of those silly things that you're always aware could happen on a big expedition of like, what's going to go wrong? Yeah, this salami. So as we made it past, it got really, really hot this day. Everybody always asks me how much wildlife we saw on this trip. I was surprised we didn't sometimes see more, but we did paddle midday, which isn't typically when you're going to see a lot of wildlife. But other than the eagles, we had some elk that actually swam across the river in front of us at the Hinton pulp mill. And as we were getting really hot and really tired, and every morning Rita would ask me, how far are we going today? And I would say, till we're done. And that's really what we did. If we could see that there was a camp spot fairly close, we would try to make it to there. Otherwise, we'd try to random camp on the side of the river with all of our gear. And this campsite was called Cougar Creek. No pun intended, as I turned 45 that day. And you don't want to really go past your campsite on the river because it's a lot of work to go back upriver if you miss it. And so we parked our boards here of what you see in the sunny picture. And we got out and we walked on the bank. And as we walked towards where we thought camp would be, Rita says to me, look at that raven, or look at that crow. And I was like, yeah, okay. We kind of see it. And we realize we're still not at camp. So we go back to our boards and we start paddling down the river. And as we got towards the raven, it started taking off in front of us. And it was this giant, immature bald eagle. And it was huge. And it actually led us to where camp was and circled over where we were supposed to stay for the night. And so that was a really cool moment, just to be with wildlife and be with nature so innately. If it wasn't eagles leading the way, a lot of times we had waterfowl, different waterfowl in the river, and they'd always stay in the main channel. So it was like we were always playing tag with them and we were always following them. So we got 78 kilometers done this day. It was a big day. It was hot, but we got it done. And we're already 158 kilometers into this trip, which was putting me really ahead of what my original schedule was. But in my brain, I kept thinking, this just gives me a leeway for what, if anything goes wrong with weather, injury, or anything else, it kind of gives me a little buffer. Oh, how to feel small in the world is you paddle through Tunnel Rock. And so on day 4 now, we paddled through this just simply gorgeous gorge. It was unbelievable. We felt very overwhelmed in nature here, and it was a good feeling. And so as we paddled through, this section started to really drop with elevation. And we came up to Old Man Creek, and it was just such a beautiful lunch spot. And that's actually where I was supposed to camp on my original plan. But we were there by 11 a.m. again, so we're half a day ahead of schedule. And it kind of became a fun game for Rita and I to see if we could paddle and get 50 kilometers done on the river by lunch. And so that became our goal every day, to get 50K done. And we did consistently, just about every day once we got onto the longer boards. And as we moved forward in this day, we ended up at the Burland River. And so it's kind of my first real shower in 5 days. We went into the Burland River, which was flowing beautifully. into the silty Athabasca River. We had 85K on the day to get here. We had a nice sandy beach, nice camp. We're making supper in this picture. I was feeling optimistic that I was having such a good time on this trip, and everybody before I left, when I would tell them what I was doing, they're like, "Oh, that's going to be so fun. Like, I'm so excited." And in my brain, I was like, I don't know how fun this will be because it's a lot of work. But it actually truly was fun. It was hard work sometimes, but just I was truly enjoying the weather being good and just feeling so grateful for that. And so we went to bed on this night, and all of a sudden my optimism, and I'm like, yeah, we got this. The orange eerie sunset set in, and we knew that the smoke was starting to come in from the BC wildfires. And so as we went to bed, it's kind of funny to note that night, this is the only night we took our bear spray out of the bag. And it wasn't for bears. It was actually because there were so many people around us. We actually, it was funny. We didn't realize how busy this camp was. So we could hear quads, we could hear people, and it's ironic, but that really is what we used our bear spray for, was to make sure that we were safe when we went to bed. 243.3 kilometers in. Oh, day 5. So the smoke came in, and the smoke rolled in very heavy. And these pictures really don't truly show how heavy the smoke got. We really could barely see up the river at some point. It actually got so bad, and I am asthmatic, so we had to stop, and I had to put my buff up, my sunglasses on so my eyes wouldn't burn. I took my asthma puffer. I took Reactin. And so today we knew that we had to get to Windfall, to the Windfall Bridge. That was our next takeout. And that was where we were meeting more people and where Rita was getting out of the water. And so I just love these pictures because I look like I'm about to go rob a bank, even though we're just paddling down the river. So as we came up to the Windfall Bridge, we were about a mile away, and we could hear something off in the distance, and it wasn't really clear at about a mile away. And same thing, there's an eagle flying overhead, and Rita and I are kind of we're just kind of savoring the end of the paddle together because I knew she was leaving, and we really had such a great trip up to that point. It was bittersweet. She was getting off the river, and I knew that next day my husband was coming, and new people were joining me. And all of a sudden we look upriver or downriver, and we're not sure what we see. I thought it was a white quad at first. And then as we look, what you're seeing on your picture with the shenanigans is my friends went to Walmart on the way to the Windfall Bridge and asked the Walmart lady very nicely if they could have the smiley faces off the wall. And she gave them to them. And they were hidden behind the Walmart smiley faces and ringing their cowbells and cheering. And it was an awesome surprise. I had no idea they were going to be there. So I was pretty overwhelmed, and it was pretty fun. There was a lot of belly laughs. I literally had to go to bed because I was laughing too hard. And at this takeout is where Terrell Jonason with Brave Viking was joining me. And Clark, another friend of mine, was joining me. And one little backstory on that was Clark actually didn't have a boat to paddle, and we really didn't know what to do with that situation. And so another little synchronicity that happened was Terrell showed up in this picture with a double kayak and no partner. And so we texted Clark that we found him a boat. And that night, Terrell and Clark met each other for the first time, and we went through all of their gear and amalgamated it and tried to fit it in a little Pelican kayak for the river. So it was pretty interesting. Along with that, Victor from Revelstoke, who we kind of joked was stranger danger because I had never met Victor in my life. Victor messaged me on Instagram about maybe 3 weeks before my paddle. And he said, "I'd like to join you." And I was like, okay. And I didn't think too much of it. I didn't know him. I saw he paddled. And so I was going to bed at 8:30 at night, and Victor wasn't showing up from Revelstoke till 11. And so it wasn't an easy spot to actually find. So we hoped that our pin worked for him to get there with Google Maps, and we all went to bed. And, you're going to bed that night and you're like, we have two guys in a kayak that haven't paddled together. We have one guy showing up we haven't even met yet. Is this going to work? What's going to happen out of this? So it was kind of, will this be okay, as we went to bed? So day 6, we wake up and lo and behold, Victor is in camp. He is loaded on his board and he is ready to go. So after I went past the Windfall Bridge and I got to Whitecourt, I was at halfway on my paddle trip. And so that was a big mental relief, was to be at 325K at that time. I thought it was still 650 kilometers. It was a big mental checklist for me. Okay, we're halfway. I can do this now. I'm halfway, because you're always going to have uncertainty. So day 6, we all get on the river together, Terrell, Clark, and Victor and I. And we're so ahead of schedule that we were already 30 kilometers, maybe not quite. We were about 20 kilometers past Whitecourt by the time my husband actually caught up to us that day. And so as much as I was sad to say goodbye to Rita on the river, we had this whole new dynamic now of these 3 boys and the jet boat for support now. And we were able to offload some of our gear, because what happens to this section of river is it gets a lot wider and flatter as you go. And we still had a little bit of elevation drop throughout this section. And along with the jet boat, Trevor and his uncle were also in it. So it was kind of fun that night. We ended up at a cabin along the river of people that we actually knew, that we didn't even realize it was their yard. And so it was kind of fun to know them and know that that was their cabin that we got to stay by. I guess my takeaway from that day was how easy we all got along on the river together and how quickly we all worked together. It's just a little bit of a picture of us parked at night. And Victor that night was so thoughtful. He got a 6-pack of Tim Hortons donuts and brought them in his dry bag until camp that night. So I thought that was so awesome. Just awesome support from everybody. And this wasn't and couldn't be done by myself to the same level. When I paddled last year to the Grand Rapids, it was by myself, other than my husband and the jet boat. But on my paddleboard, when he passed me, I was consistently alone, and it was a lot harder mentally. And having all of the people with me I did so far to this point really was just making the trip amazing. And I was so, again, thankful that it was all going so well. You really do start to wonder what else is next. So day 7, another big day. I was 2/3 done in my head. We did 87 kilometers on this day. And so we were going to Viga, and it was kind of Viga or bust. We were getting to Viga no matter what. And you pay the river sooner or later. You're not going to get away with a 10-day paddle on the river without some kind of challenge. And so we started out with a great morning, great weather, and about typically when the wind does pick up is after lunch. And soon after lunch, we hit headwinds that were pushing us upriver. They were debilitating. The only good part is that the river really started to snake and kind of turn back on itself a little bit more in these sections. And so as the river would snake, we would paddle into a headwind for all we had. And then we would, as you can see in the little party raft we have going on here, we would just eat and drink and replenish and kind of have a mental check-in and be like, hey, everybody's okay. And we kind of made a joke that nobody was allowed to talk about the wind because mentally it's not going to help you on the river to complain about the wind. You just are just going to have to paddle in it or stop. So we didn't want to stop. And so we did a few sections and it was still really, really windy. And this was my emotional day. This was a hard day for me. The fatigue is starting to build up and it was really emotional. I realized that I had another person joining me the next day and that was going to be an emotional day on the river. And I was very frustrated in the wind. And at the same time, I was so overcome with how supportive everybody was on the river. The boys would wait for me if I just couldn't paddle as hard as them in the wind, and they'd be cheering for me when I came around the corner. I had a good cry on the river this day. There was a lot of emotion tied up in this day. And I think that was a good thing, because it has to kind of come eventually too when you do something that's longer and starts to wear you down. And these guys truly became my river family. And I would paddle anywhere with all three of these guys. And anywhere, anytime. It was just amazing. Strangers in one sense to just river family. And so by the end of this day, we were at, what did I say here? 482 kilometers. I was so happy to see the Viga ferry. I could have kissed the ground. So as I reached Viga, I literally had nothing left in the tank. I had left it all on the river. It was a hard day. I sat on the riverbank for a little while. I was pretty tired. And it was the last day with Victor on the river, and we were also really aware of that. He was just paddling for 2 days. So you can see the stoke and how excited the boys were when we got to camp. And that was the atmosphere and the energy that they brought all the time, whether it was when we all knew when silence was good, and then we all knew when we'd sing together. Sometimes Clark would tell bad jokes. And so it always ebbed and flowed, just like the river, of what we did on the river and how we reacted to each other. And it was always just right. And then same with the jet boat, they always came and supported when they could see we might need it. And it was just such a great river family. That's really the only word for it. We are on to day 8. And so when we talk about this paddle being for mental health, every night I luckily was getting 1 bar of service, which was quite amazing. And I was able to post on social media where I was on the river, how it was going. And to be honest, it's funny, but that was the hardest part of my day, was actually posting on social media. But the impact of it that I discovered later was pretty profound, when I had people coming up to me or messaging me about people they had lost. And so Angela joined me on day 8, and she had lost her son to suicide about a month before this paddle. And so this was a really powerful day. I was so happy that she decided to join me when I asked her. And our plan was to do 87 kilometers on this day. And so we started off in this beautiful, nice flat water morning. And we hit such slow water. It was, the irony of it wasn't lost on me. It was a lot of time for reflection, because you really weren't going anywhere on the water. And so the boys and I, we knew the speed of paddling that we were able to maintain. We were able to do 50K by lunch. The river flow was good. We were having, other than the headwind day, we were making good time. And this day was just so different, and it was so wonderful. We had a lot of good talks on the river. It became really apparent, though, because the flow rate slowed down so much that we weren't going anywhere. And that to do 87K in the day would be 10:30 at night in the dark to finish. And so we had a little team meeting at lunch. Well, it was at 3:30 in the afternoon, and we thankfully found a different takeout. And my husband discovered that we could take out at Chisholm. And so we ended up with 548K total on this day, of 66K of paddling. And I was just so grateful that we got to experience that and share that with Angela. And I'm so happy that she came with us. And it was a really special day on the water. The water is healing. It's a special place for people. And that doesn't matter if you're dealing with grief or if you're just dealing with work from stress. The water is just, there's something magical about it. Oh my goodness. We are looking at the end of the unknown. So this is the last section of river before the Smith Bridge, is the only section of the river that I hadn't paddled to Athabasca. And so before we got to Smith, I had texted a friend of mine that lives in Smith, and I said, hey, we're not sure we have enough gas for the rest of the trip. We're pretty sure we do. But if somebody got hurt, we had to run up or down river. We just don't want to take the chance of maybe not having enough gas. I mean, we were 90% sure. And so, true to small town Smith hospitality, or Hamlet, I guess you could call Smith, with a couple texts, Jen was able to text her sister And they brought gas out. They went and picked my husband and his uncle up, and they took them to get gas for the boat. And then Trevor and Dan brought them on the river to come meet us on the river and say hi to us. And it was just, it's the same thing. It's all that camaraderie and that support that you have. And so as we finally got to Smith for me was another big mental checklist. I had made it to Smith. I had made it uninjured, and I felt like I could float laying flat on my board if I needed to make it home. So we did 80 kilometers on this day. And as we got to camp that night, I am so thankful that we had Trevor and Dan with us. It was awesome. They had a fire made. Dan was up in the morning by 5:45 with a fire and coffee going. And it was just so wonderful to wake up and have that cozy fire to be by. I was actually so physically tired this night that I couldn't get out of my chair to serve myself supper. So my husband just looks at me and he goes, "You can't get up, can you?" I'm like, "No." So thank goodness for him. He brought me a plate of food, and I was a zombie. I didn't want to get off the river, and I was feeling really good most of the time paddling. But just the fatigue of each day starts to add up. Trying to do big mileage every day, when you're doing 80 to 87 kilometers a day, it just starts to add up. They're anywhere from 9 to 11-hour days. And so a friend of mine, I went to lay in the bed on our boat quite early that night, and I had packed the River of Hope sign that my friends made me at the takeout in Windfall. And when I was on the island in Jasper, I had started the book, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And a good friend of mine, Crystal, had gave me the book, and she wrote a really wonderful note in the front of it. And she said, "I think this book is fitting for your trip." And I just honestly was too tired most nights. I was in bed by 7:30, so I hadn't read much of it other than the first night. But I really wanted to finish it before I got off the river. And so as hard as I tried, I tried reading this book to finish it before going to bed, and I just couldn't stay awake. So I went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m, and I was just full of a lot of emotion and reflection. The stars were out. I was still just really overwhelmed by how many people had reached out to me, and how many people wanted to help me, and how many people were cheering for me. And so that was my emotional night, and I think of just gratitude. And so when I got to town the next day, I had already had my moment on the boat at 3 a.m. So it's the last day, it's day 10. It was bittersweet. And I woke up at 6 a.m. The fire was going at 5:45. I heard Dan up. And I thought, no, I'm not going to get out of bed. I'm going to finish my book. And so I finished my book. And we got up and we all got ready. And it was a really weird atmosphere in camp, because you're not ready to be off the river. Everybody said, "You must have been so happy to be done." And I really just didn't want to leave. I felt a part of that river and a part of nature. And as you stayed on the river longer, it drew you in deeper. And I really understand now why when people do expeditions, they keep seeking out longer and longer expeditions removed from civilization. And so as happy as I was to be done and finish my goal, we all just were enjoying our time, our last morning together and our last time together. And so before we left that morning, we all had kind of a meeting, little debrief, and I asked them about their highs and their lows and how the trip was for them. And we had a plan, or I had a plan, because those of you that know me know I usually have a plan in my head for each year of what I want to do. So we all kind of agreed that next year, Fort McMurray to Lake Athabasca is going to be a great paddle section to do. So that was already planned in the morning. And it was awesome, because as I got closer to town, I got near Gorski's, and there was 3 people there, Corrine and Isabel and Ida, and they joined me for the last section of river. And it was like the perfect re-entry group, because it wasn't too many people and it wasn't too overwhelming. And so being able to paddle with them and have a new energy and new people as we laughed and we talked was a really good icebreaker for me to come home into town. And it was funny, because I was getting really frustrated with the river flows. it's hard when you tell people what time you're going to meet them or when you're coming to town. And so I felt the pressure that I wasn't meeting them on time. And I verbalized that to the boys. And I said, I'm so frustrated right now that I told them a time and I'm behind time, I'm late. And then I had to just keep reminding myself that I was in the moment and I was supposed to be enjoying this instead of feeling frustrated on the last day of a really big trip. Oh, we made it. Oh, wow. So I still to this day am very humbled by how many people were on the riverbanks on a Thursday afternoon. I really didn't expect that. And we did 60 kilometers on the day and we finished with 663 kilometers of paddling. And these boys really just made my trip, and I couldn't be more thankful for them joining me and for Rita paddling with me at the start and everybody that joined me on the river. And there's not a lot of words for it. The irony was at the end when I saw Cecile up on the bank and Bruce, and I went up to say hi to them. And she said to me, she said, "Did you see the eagle over you?" And I was like, "No." I'm like, "You're kidding me." And she goes, "No, there's an eagle circling over you the whole time you finished." So that was really quite fitting end to that trip, as the eagles led the way that whole trip. And I can proudly say that between my friends selling hot dogs at the river's edge and so many generous people throughout the province, BC, Alberta, a lot from Athabasca, we raised nearly $10,000 for mental health between the 3 partnerships. And that's really amazing. So I'm working right now with the Center for Suicide Prevention. Hopefully we can partner to bring them to our town to maybe do a workshop as well. With the money that my friends raised, we're in initial planning of maybe doing a mentorship expedition paddle with the mentorship program. I don't know what that'll look like yet, but I really want to give back to youth with mental health. And I really feel like that's going to be a great byproduct from this paddle. I just really want to thank the Alice B. Donahue Library for inviting me to do this. You already know what's next. I'm paddling to Lake Athabasca next year.